So transitioning systems, you have the slide, there's your call out up top. So again, why? We changed our standards. So something happened a few weeks ago, depending on when we started school. All of our grade level expectations in reading, writing, and math went poof, and we have Common Core standards. So I think one of the double-edged swords of local-based decision-making is that on a day-to-day basis, Washington has 300 districts. On a day-to-day basis, each district with its unique needs can make determinations for each student, right? So students in the Yakima Valley and in Seattle and Bellingham and Vancouver and Olmec can all take their funds and decide what's going to work best. However, when we all have to make a change together, that can be really difficult. So I imagine we have quite a few districts in this room. Washington adopted Common Core state standards in 2011. There was no mandated rollout except that today or 2.5 weeks ago, all students, including children in this population, were being taught against those standards. Some districts, 2011, 2012, were teaching curriculum that was completely aligned to Common Core for all students. They had professional development at the district level, at the building level, for all persons. Some districts have said, you know what, as soon as we need to do it in 2014, we'll do it. There's not a value, it just means that at this moment, right now in this year, we're all over the place to some extent. And that's okay too. It's just a year of transition. Just so you know, I think many of you probably do, our Washington science standards, we're still working against state standards. Washington's adopted next generation science standards, but they will do that same sort of slow rollout over the next few years. Okay. And again, our change is for all students, so if we change what we teach, we've got to change what we measure. And I always do this short segue here about learning standards, because I think they're one of those things, especially when we start talking about Common Core standards, that if you're not super embedded in them, they can feel a little bit scary because they've been kind of hijacked and there's been a lot of conversation around them that maybe isn't as focused on education as it should be. But we've had learning standards since the beginning of standards-based reform, which is the early 80s. A Nation at Risk, sort of in 83, set off the standards-based reform movement. So we've been teaching standards-based learning for a long time. In all the different states I've worked in persons I've known, we have different standards across different states that all kind of did, to varying degrees, the same sort of thing. But standards just call out at a various point in time what children should know and be able to do. So at the end of 3rd grade, Leslie should know these things about math, these things about reading, these things about writing. Okay. So now we're at common standards. There are some great things about them, maybe some not as good things about them, just like our Washington standards. What's important to us is the U.S. Department of Ed says we can define, and we should, alternate standards for students in this population. They can be reduced in both breadth and expanded in complexity. So that's the work that we've done, which is, I think, really exciting work for our kids. Okay, so I have a couple more slides, and you have them too, just to, again, highlight the transition and kind of set ourselves up with context to all of the students in the state. So again, if you think about here, as of 3 weeks ago, we were working with our grade level expectations and our performance expectations, and for the purposes of accountability, we measured proficiency in those standards with state-based tests, so the MSP or the HSPE. For students in this population, we measured student proficiency with a WASP portfolio. Well, we've moved. We have Common Core standards, and so some of you may have been involved in some of the activities around the Smarter Balanced Assessment, but if not, you will be upcoming. The MSP and HSPE, that assessment and the students that are assessed with that assessment has been replaced with the Smarter Balanced Assessment. Our new assessment, the one that we're learning about today, is what replaces the WASP portfolio to measure standards associated with the Common Core. And I gave you this slide too because I think this will help show us and kind of completely recalibrate where we are with regards to both teaching and measurement. So broken down a little bit more. If we started in the system that we had up until last year, we had Washington state standards, and then we had, for this group of kids in this population, extensions of the GLE standards. We used a WASP portfolio assessment to measure those GLEs. So if we shift over, what you can see is the categories remain the same, but there's different pieces to it. So the Common Core standards, we switch standards. And if we have a slide for standards, we now have alternate standards that we're calling our access frameworks. And those are our expanded standards. And how are we going to measure those? We're using our new tool that we're talking about today. So it's a performance-based assessment. I do a really quick segue here to say, it is the same participation criteria. It has not changed. IEP teams make the decision. You know who should be taking what assessment. That is completely in your wheelhouse. If you determined last year, your student's IEP, that they would take the alternate assessment, they'll take the alternate assessment. If you determined they would take the general assessment, they would take the general assessment. Those are the two options going in. If the general assessment you noted was the MSP, the Smarter Balance. They're the same two options. They're just different instruments because we have different standards. Okay, so we kind of covered why we do what we do. It's legislatively mandated. And we talked a little bit about who takes it, which is you decide, and why we're going here is because we switched our standards. So if we switch our standards, we have the opportunity to build out a new instrument with as many features as possible to make this work as well as possible. So I'm going to give you that 30,000-foot look right now as to what this whole package is, if you will. And then I'll take you through each piece. So what I'm telling you right now is like the massive overview of what is this animal. So the assessment itself measures knowledge and skills aligned to the Common Core. Okay. I don't sort of presume any knowledge, so if I'm saying things that you know really well, excellent. And if you're not sure about the Common Core or its organizational structures, I'll tell you just a little bit about it. So mathematics, English language arts, the Common Core has collapsed reading and writing into English language arts. To me, that shift makes sense. You can't write without reading or read without writing. They are sort of a cohesive body. But so we won't talk about reading and writing as separate subject areas. We'll talk about them as English language arts. Again, just calling out that our Washington ELARs remain state-based. So we're measuring knowledge and skills really clearly that are called out in our access point frameworks, and those are our alternate standards, which is what we'll talk about first. It's a performance task assessment. It's pre-post, so it's a baseline and a final. So where are we? What do we know? After teaching quite a bit, what more do we know? Okay. And it's delivered with, so it's delivered and facilitated with an online platform. Okay. So our test design, if you will, we call out skills, and I'll show you, we'll walk through all of those. We call out skills in sort of alternate standards that we built into frameworks. Then we have a way to measure them, and you'll see that relationship with performance tasks. And this is language that refers to the organizational structure of the Common Core. So there are 5 domains in math. Math is referred to as domains. It's their organizational structure. There are 5 strands of English language arts. Again, that's the Common Core organizational structure. And English language arts is reading, informational and literary. There is writing, 2 types of writing, and there is speaking and listening. For special educators, that's a little bit of a shift to think about our language, because speaking and listening we usually refer to or think about as SLP, forming words. In this case, in the case of English language arts, it's about content and collaboration and thinking about how children are working together under sort of the umbrella of literacy. And what we did here is we kind of scooped our science assessment in. Okay? I make really sure to continually to call out students use their preferred mode of communication. So neither do standards nor does the assessment dictate how a student will tell you what he or she knows. If your student communicates with eye gaze and that's how you know what she knows, then they will do that. Okay? If a student is verbal across the spectrum, he or she will speak with whatever that looks like. If a student signs, whether they use some sort of formal ASL or they use SEE or their own set of signs, they will do that as well. Okay? So I'm using this big graphic just to sort of remind ourselves, grades 3 through 8 are kind of steady as they go. High school bumps the grade from 10 to 11. You may know this already because it is across the board. So if you're a high school teacher, you've probably heard this already because it is Smarter Balanced as well. we now have to assess in 11th grade. So let me tell you a couple things about that. So children who are not in this population, they're kind of working with the two sets of assessment criteria. So we have a state mandated assessment, we have a state mandated requirement to assess students for graduation, right? Students have to pass a graduation requirement in order to earn a diploma. So students not in this population will take a graduation exit exam at 10th grade, accountability at 11th, and then have retake opportunities. So children in this population will be assessed at 11th grade and then have retake opportunities, and we'll work through that process as we need to make sure they all have the opportunity to get through that space. So the question comes up all the time. If my kids took the portfolio in 13, 14, and they passed, do they lose their scores for graduation? Absolutely not. They count. They still have met that. For accountability, do they have to be assessed? Yes. So math, English language arts, and science. So there are 5 domains for math. There are 5 strands for English language arts, and we use 5 of our ELers. So from baseline to final, there's a minimum of 6 weeks. We have 5.5 months. You can use all 5.5 months. You can also say, we're not ready to dig into any of this until February, and that's totally fine too. So there is no mandated assessment window. Okay, said we used November 1st because it was a cold, hard date. It's a Saturday this year, so I hope we're all asleep when November 1 comes around. But November 1st to April. November 1st, 3rd, 10th can combine. You can do nothing. Okay? It's just when the window opens. And it ends on April 10th. So you can't do anything after that. Okay, so coming back to time frame for the assessment. The assessment itself has a minimum of 6 weeks between a baseline and a final. Where that 6 weeks falls on the calendar, 1 is up to you, and 2, it can be 8 weeks or 3 months or 5.5 months. Okay. That is your call. And as we walk through it, you'll see you can do part of it in one point and part of it another point. You don't have to administer it as a chunk. So I think that will really help in terms of it being fairly instructionally embedded. Okay. So what I'm going to show you here is this piece, and then we'll start walking through another. So this is NGrade, and it is the name of the company. It is the NGrade platform that is building our assessment platform for us. So the NGrade system is just the name of the company. So what you will see when you go in, I have a variety of grades here because this is my dummy account. So when you go in, you will see your students and your grades. If you were like me, I was a middle school teacher. And as a middle school teacher teaching this population and most populations that I worked with, I had children in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And for some of my kids that we knew would be with us for a long time, we kept them in 8th grade for a little while longer to keep them away from high schoolers as long as possible. So enrollment year is a district decision in our state. So you will want to make sure that you work with your district or your school. They'll have clocked your kids in, so you'll just check. So what you will see if you're an elementary teacher, if you're in your class, you might have 2 kids that come into your 3rd grade class and 2 in your 5th grade class, but they're all assigned to you. And that's fine. One of the nice things about this, the many nice things, and you'll see as we walk through this, I'll do a full demo in roughly 1 hour, and I'll take you through the whole system, is that for TPAP purposes, if you have to build a cohort of students, and we know there's so much variability in this population, it's a little bit hard, but you'll have all your students. I have 5 3rd graders here. I have a cohort built, and they're all together, and they're all doing some of the same practices, and I have a baseline and a final. So it does help facilitate that purpose as well. So I think that can be really helpful. This is kind of our portal. Every single thing that you will need to know will run through this page. So that's how you got here, was to trainings on the far end. There will also be online modules posted. So if you didn't go to the training and you don't want to watch the video, you can go ahead and walk through each piece of the PowerPoint and also listen to me. Go through each step and have a script with it. Under resources, I'm starting to build together sort of a resource library, and I'll certainly be taking hopefully a lot of input, putting up things like adapted text resources and things like that. Administration platform, that's where NGrade will live. The portal to NGrade will be there, as well as supporting resources. And then we'll start taking you very soon as we further this conversation through the area that says access point frameworks and performance tasks. And that's where all of the documents for this assessment will live. So as long as you're here and you know how to toggle back and forth, you'll be all set.